the question came in, what's the difference in how these equations, these new functions are written? So on 9e, where it has the 2 in front of the f of x function, that means I'm going to take the entire f of x function, which is just e to the x, and multiply it by 2. So that one's just going to be written as 2 times e to the x. Now on f, where it has the 2x in the parentheses, that means I'm going to replace the x in the original function with a 2x. So I would have e, but where the x is, instead of just writing an x, it gets replaced with 2x. Yeah, you can go ahead and fix them if you got them wrong. On g, where it has the negative 2 in front of the f of x, that one's going to be done like 9e. So since it's the function, which was e to the x, that whole function is being multiplied by the negative 2. So that one will be negative 2 e to the x. And then where the f of negative 2, where that negative 2x is inside the parentheses, it goes in the function where the x was at. So we'll get e, and then instead of just putting x right up there, it's going to be negative 2x. So those would be the proper ways to write those functions. Did anyone want me to graph any of those? So f, and which one did you want?
G.
F and G? Okay. Okay, so I'll start with f. E was 2e to the x. So when we graph, the very first thing I told you guys to find when you graph these is the horizontal asymptote. And the horizontal asymptote, when these are in the form a, b to the x minus h plus k, the k is what tells us the horizontal asymptote. So the horizontal asymptote is y equals k. So when I look at e to the 2x, what would my k be? Yeah. So if you wanted to, you could just write in a plus a 0 there. So I have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0, which corresponds to the x-axis. And then the next thing I told you to do when you graph is to use the opposite of h value to plug in for your first x. Now the h has to be part of the exponent, but it has to be the number that's being added or subtracted over here. And I don't have something being added or subtracted, so my h value would be 0. And opposite of 0 is still just 0. So 0 is the first value I would plug in. So then I will get e to the 2 times 0, but 2 times 0 is just 0. So e to the 0 is 1. So I graph the ordered pair 0, 1. And then this is going to be exponential growth because there's not a negative in front of that exponent of x. So I want to choose now x values to the right of 0, so like maybe 1, 2, just pick some to the right. So if I plug in 1, I'll get e to the 2 times 1, which is e to the second. Now, I don't have e to the second memorized, so I can come over here on the calculator, hit second, the divide sign for the e, and then raise it to the second power. Remember, e is just the number 2.7. So when I raise that to the second power, I get 7.4 roughly. So 1, okay, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.4 would be somewhere about right there. If I plugged in 2, I would get e to the 2 times 2, which is e to the 4th. So I could come over here, second divide, raise it to the 4th power, and get 54. There's no way I want to graph 2, 54. So I'm just going to use the 2 points that I already have to graph it. So exponential graphs really start shooting up pretty quickly. They end up increasing a lot quicker than linear lines and quadratic graphs. And then the other one, g, so when I graph 9g, which was negative 2 e to the x, Again, the first thing I want to figure out is my horizontal asymptote, but my horizontal asymptote is still just going to be y equals 0 because there was no k value over here. So it's still just corresponding to the x-axis. And then I want to plug in the opposite of the h value, but again, there's nothing up here, so it would have been like x plus 0. So the first x value I'm going to plug in is 0. So if I plug in 0, I get negative 2 e to the 0th power. I know e to the 0th power is 1, so then I get 1 times negative 2, which is negative 2. So I have 0 comma negative 2. And then because this exponent x is positive, I know this is going to be exponential growth. So I'm going to choose values to the right of the x value of 0, say 1. So then I'd get negative 2e to the first, and I can just type that in. Negative 2e, and then to the first power is just the same as e. So I get negative 5.4. So like maybe something right there. If I were to plug in 2, I'll get negative 2e to the second power, negative 14.7. And I don't even have room to go down to negative 14.7, so I'm just going to use the 2 points that I already have and sketch in my graph. So approach the asymptote there and then go down. Okay, so I accidentally skipped the part that says what effects does it have, so we'll do 9g's effect and then 9f's effect. So on 9g, when you compared this graph with the graph that you had done in A, what changed between the graphs? Okay, so my effect, we can say reflect, and it had a stretch, vertical stretch. Okay, when you compare your graph of F with your graph of A, what changed with that one? I would say more vertical stretch. It's still crossing the y-axis at 0, just like it did on A. So, and then all of these other points, so like this point at 1, is now up higher. So I would say just a vertical stretch on this one.
And on these, we are supposed to form the main length.
Okay, so graphing this one, number 1 step, identify the horizontal asymptote, which corresponds to the k. So my horizontal asymptote is y equals 0, so it's still right along the x-axis. And then the x value that you choose first in the table is the opposite of the h. But I don't have anything that's saying up here at the exponent plus a number or minus a number. So my h is a 0. So then I'm just going to do e to the negative 2 times 0, which is e to the 0, and I know e to the 0 is 1. So I graph 0, comma 1. And then should this one be a growth or decay graph?
Growth.
I heard both growth and decay. Okay, decay is right. It has a negative in front of that x value. So since I know it's going to be decaying, instead of choosing values to the right of 0, I want to choose values to the left of 0. So like maybe negative 1, negative 2, stuff like that. So I'll have e to the negative 2 times negative 1, which is e to the second. And then e to the second, I can do on the calculator, 7.3 or 7.4. So about somewhere between 7 and 8, so about right there. And then if I did e to the negative 2, plugged in negative 2, I'd have negative 2 times negative 2. So I get e to the positive 4. which is going to be a huge number, 54. And there's no way I'm going to graph that. So I'm just going to use the 2 points that I have to sketch in this graph. It looks something like that. And then filling out the part that says, what effect did the composition have? Comparing this with the graph of A, what changed? Okay, so we could say this is now a decay graph. It still had a vertical stretch. And then it had, what was the other one that we said? Reflection, thank you. Only this time it's a reflection about the y-axis instead of the x. Reflect with regard to y-axis. Okay, so to graph number 5, the very first step, find the horizontal asymptote. And what would my horizontal asymptote be? Okay. So horizontal asymptote, y equals -2. And then get that drawn in. Now my next step is I want to choose the opposite of h to plug in for my first x. So what number do I want to plug in for x? Good, -1, because my h would have been opposite of the +1. Okay, so then when I plug in -1, this is where this problem is kind of confusing. So when I do -2, -1 plus 1 minus 2, I get -2 to the 0th minus -2. Now I know that a number to the 0th power is 1, but the interpretation on this, the base of this function is just the 2. Technically, the a, so the b is just the 2. This negative that was in front of it is really the a. So this could have been written as -1 times 2 to the x plus 1 minus 2. So when I do this right here, it's really 2 that's being raised to the 0th power, which would become 1. But then I have that negative in front, so I end up with -1 minus 2 for -3. So at -1, I go down 3, put my point. And then if I plugged in, now predict whether I should have values to the left or right. Would I expect this to be a growth or decay graph? Good. Growth, so I want to choose values to the right of -1, so like maybe 0. So then I'll get negative, then 2 to the 0 plus 1 minus 2. So I get -2 to the, negative 2 to the first minus 2. So 2 to the first is 2. But then I have to times it by that negative in front. So I have -2 minus 2, which is -4. And then 0, -4 would put me here. If I were to say plug in 1, I get -2 to the 1 plus 1 minus 2. So I get -2 squared minus 2. Now 2 squared is 4. 4 times that -1 gives me -4 minus 2, which is -6. So then 2, 4, 5, 6. So now I'm down here into my work, so I'm going to stop plugging in values. So then it's looking something like that. And then if I was doubting that I did that correctly, I could always come up here to my y equals and graph it. So I would just type in -2 raised to the x plus 1, and then minus 2. And then when I look at the graph, I see that it is going that direction. If I went to the table, second graph to get to the table, if I typed in my -1, 0, 1, I see that I get -3, -4, -6, just like I got over there when I did it by hand. So you had to do that, and then you had to state whether it was growth or decay. And what was this one? Growth, correct. Okay, to start the composition, since it says f of x minus 2, and that minus 2 is outside of the f of x function, it means I write my f of x function exactly as it was, and then I subtract 2 from it. So I'm really going to graph e to the x minus 2. So then my first step I want is to determine my horizontal asymptote. And what would the horizontal asymptote on this one be? Good, -2. So that minus 2 that they had us do on the function ends up being the k. So we'll say horizontal asymptote y equals -2. So drawing that one in. And then the first x value I want to pick for my table is the opposite of the h, but there was nothing up there with the x, so it's just going to be 0. So plugging that in, I get e to the 0 minus 2. E to the 0 is just 1, so I get 1 minus 2, which is -1. So 0, -1 would be there. And then I predict whether this should be growth or decay, and which one should it be? You look at the x. Yeah, since the x was positive, you should have growth. So since it's growth, I'd want to choose values to the right of the x value of 0. Say 1, 2, and so on. So if I plug in 1, I get e to the 1 minus 2. And then I know e is about 2.7, so e to the 1 is just the same as saying e. Minus 2, so if I did 2.7 minus 2, I get 0.7. So 1 comma 0.7 would be about there. If I plug in 2, I get e squared minus 2. So e to the second minus 2, 5.4 roughly. So between 5 and 6 is where that would land. If I did 3, I'd get e cubed minus 2. Which gives me 18. So it's shooting up really quickly now. So I'm not going to graph that one. And then you just approach, go through your points, and then approach your asymptote. Okay, and then comparing this with your graph of A, what changed? What was that? Down 2, okay. So down 2, or I could say vertical shift down 2. Did anything else happen? No. Okay. Everything just got shifted